You don't belong in first class.
You don't belong up here. Let go of the arm or I'll make you move. The words cut through the first-class cabin like a blade, sharp and loud enough to silence the soft jazz humming through the speakers. A split second later came the sound no one ever forgets it once they hear it. A dry, hollow crack. Not a scream, not turbulence. A crack, like a wooden ruler snapped over a desk. Then the scream came. It tore out of a 12-year-old girl sitting in seat 2A, a scream so raw and terrified it made grown adults freeze mid-breath. Her name was Zariah Vale. She was small for her age, with smooth brown skin, neatly styled curls pulled back, and eyes so clear and bright they looked almost unreal against the panic flooding her face. She stared down at her right arm, now bent at an angle that no arm should ever bend. Standing over her was the chief flight attendant, Bridget Sloan, her jaw tight, her grip finally loosening as realization flickered across her face. For just one heartbeat, the power drained out of the room. "My arm," Zariah sobbed. "You broke my arm." A businessman across the aisle dropped his phone. Another passenger gasped and covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." But Bridget recovered fast, too fast. She was resisting, Bridget snapped, her voice rising, reclaiming authority. She was disruptive. This child is a security issue. Zariah shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't do anything. I have a ticket. I have a ticket." Her boarding pass lay crumpled on the floor, still showing first class in bold letters. No one noticed the man standing just beyond the curtain separating business class from first. He had been on his feet the instant the scream changed pitch, the moment instinct told him this was no longer an argument. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed simply in a charcoal jacket and dark jeans. No entourage, no display of wealth, just a stillness about him that felt heavy. His name was Drayton Vale, and the child clutching her shattered arm was his daughter. He stepped forward, his voice low but impossibly clear. "Step away from her." Bridget turned, irritation flashing across her face. "Sir, return to your seat."
The issue is a crew matter. Drayton didn't raise his voice. He didn't repeat himself. He looked past Bridget, straight down at Zariah. He took in the tears, the shaking, shaking and unnatural bend of bone beneath fabric. Something ancient and dangerous settled behind his eyes. He spoke again. "You're done." Bridget scoffed. "You don't get to tell me how to do my job." Drayton finally looked at her. "You just assaulted a child. And you chose the wrong child." The cabin was silent now. Even the engine seemed quieter. What Bridget didn't know, what no one on that plane knew yet, was that Drayton Vale wasn't just another passenger she could intimidate. He wasn't just a father. He was the black CEO whose company controlled the safety systems this airline depended on to stay in the air. And before that plane ever reached cruising altitude, he was about to make a decision that would ground an entire airline and expose a culture that thought a little girl like Zariah didn't deserve to sit in first class. If you believe moments reveal who people truly are, you're in the right place. This is Hidden Worth, and this story only gets heavier from here. Zariah Vale was no stranger to planes. She had been flying since she was 3, buckling her stuffed giraffe into the seat beside her while her dad finished conference calls from 35,000 feet. But this flight felt different. It was her first time flying solo in first class. It wasn't a luxury gift. It was a small celebration. A middle school math competition in DC, something she had studied for all summer. Her dad booked her seat himself. Seat 2A. Non-negotiable. She didn't dress to stand out. Her hoodie was a soft cream color, the kind you'd wear on a cold morning with hot cocoa. Her jeans were dark and jean. Her sneakers were simple white canvas, scrubbed spotless. Her backpack, a faded navy canvas bag, carried a book, some snacks, and a note from her dad tucked inside. Zariah moved quietly, said please and thank you, always smiled at the flight crew. She had been raised to treat everyone with respect.
But what no one told her was that respect isn't always returned, especially please and thank you, especially when you don't fit someone's idea of who belongs in first class. As she stepped into the cabin, the world changed. The air felt cooler and pressurized. The overhead bins gleamed. The seats were wide and leathered, each like a miniature lounge. A flight attendant with a clipboard didn't smile at her. She looked up, blinked, and narrowed her eyes. "Sweetheart," the woman said flatly, "first class is ahead, yes, but coach boards through the rear." Zariah stopped. "Yes, ma'am, I'm in 2A. She held out her boarding pass, fingers steady even though her voice was small. The woman didn't take it. She just looked at it from a distance, then looked Zariah up and down, eyes lingering on the hoodie, the curls, and skin. "This must be a mistake," she muttered, almost to herself. "What's your last name?" "Vale." The name didn't register, not yet. Bridget Sloan, the chief purser, had memorized the list of Diamond Tier members, the CEOs, influencers, and senators who sometimes boarded Northridge flights. But Zariah Vale wasn't on her radar, not someone who looked like this. Bridget took the pass like it was sticky. She turned it over, looked at the seat number again, and frowned. "Where are your parents, sweetheart?" "My dad booked the ticket," Zariah said calmly. "He's on the flight too, just sitting further back." Bridget's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. Her voice turned syrupy, like speaking to a lost toddler in a mall. "I see. Well, we may have an upgrade error. It happens sometimes with family bookings. We have a nice seat in Economy Plus. You'll be much more comfortable back there. It's less formal." Zariah hesitated, not because she didn't understand what was happening, but because she did. Her dad had warned her. He said some people won't see you first. They'll see what they think you are. Then they'll decide where you're allowed to be. "No, thank you," she said firmly, stepping toward her seat. "I'm in 2A. The businessman in 1C shifted uncomfortably. A woman in 3D glanced over her glasses. Bridget raised her voice just a little. "Sweetheart, this cabin is reserved for premium passengers, first class only." "I know," Zariah said.
My dad's Drayton Vale. He's the CEO of Aethergrid. That made a few people look up. Even the businessman blinked. But Bridget just smirked. She didn't know the name, and she didn't care. To her, Zariah was just a black kid in a hoodie, standing in her perfectly curated cabin, and Bridget wasn't about to let the illusion of luxury be disrupted. Conflict wasn't new for Zariah, but this wasn't a schoolyard or an online forum. This was an airplane, 30 minutes from takeoff, and she was about to learn that when people try to force you out of a seat you've earned, it's not always about the ticket. It's about what they think your seat is worth, and who do they think deserves to sit there. Bridget didn't need to say the word ghetto. She didn't need to say you people or anything else that would have her written up. That's not how it works anymore. Discrimination has evolved. It's polite now, dressed up in policy and fake concern, hiding behind phrases like protocol and customer experience. She turned toward the galley and snapped her fingers. "Tessa," she called, "pull up the economy manifest. We have a passenger misplacement in first." Tessa Nguyen, a younger flight attendant with soft eyes and a nervous energy, glanced up from her pre-flight checklist. She hesitated. "What seat number?" 2A. Little girl. Hoodie. No guardian. Tessa frowned. She tapped her tablet and scrolled. She's listed here. Zariah Vale. First class. Flagged VIP, actually." Bridget snorted. "VIP? According to who?" Tessa turned the tablet around. It clearly showed Zariah's name highlighted in gold, next to a note, "Do not move, VIP family traveler." There was even an internal code next to it, Aethergrid exact authorization. Bridget didn't even look at it. "System glitch," she said flatly, waving it away. "She doesn't belong up here. No offense, but this is why they shouldn't automate upgrades." "She didn't get upgraded," Tessa replied quietly. "It was booked." Bridget lowered her voice and stepped closer, her tone tightening like a leash. "Tessa, I don't have time to explain how optics work. We have senators on this flight, C-suite executives. This cabin is an environment, not a public bus." You want them sipping champagne while a middle schooler in a hoodie watching TikTok next to them. You think that sells first class? Tessa said nothing, her mouth pressed into a thin line. She knew the situation was wrong, but she wasn't senior enough to stop it. Bridget turned back towards Zariah. "All right," she said, louder now. "Let's go, miss. We're moving you to a more suitable seat." Zariah didn't budge. "I already said no thank you," This is my seat. The man in 1C, the VIP, the one who hadn't made eye contact so far, finally lowered his newspaper. He glanced between Bridget and Zariah. "Is there an issue?" he asked. Bridget smiled wide, suddenly syrup sweet again. "No, Mr. Pritchard, just a minor seating mix-up. I'm resolving it." Then, like flipping a switch, her face went cold again as she turned back to Zariah. "You're holding up the boarding process. You are not cleared for this cabin." Zariah reached down and pulled out her phone, opening her boarding pass app and holding it up. "Seat 2A, paid in full, booked by my dad." Bridget didn't even look. She reached out and plucked the phone from her hand. "Hey," Zariah said, shocked. Bridget scanned it like she was checking for counterfeits. Then she held it up for the rest of the cabin to see. "Looks like someone printed a barcode, but that doesn't make it valid." Zariah's cheeks burned, not from guilt, from humiliation. She felt all the eyes now, felt the weight of strangers staring, judging, wondering if she had snuck up front, if maybe she was lying. And Bridget knew that. That's what she wanted. "This is outrageous," Mr. Pritchard muttered. "The manifest would clear this up." "It's been reviewed," Bridget lied smoothly. "No confirmation, no ID. This could be fraud. I'm responsible for the safety of every passenger on board." Tessa took a breath, stepped forward again, her tablet still open. "She's cleared. I'm showing it right now. She's flagged by name. Drayton Vale's daughter." Bridget froze for a heartbeat, but her pride wouldn't let her stop. Well, then maybe Mr. Vale should have taught his daughter not to impersonate a grown-up. The words hit harder than any slap. Zariah blinked. For a moment she didn't understand.
Then her throat tightened, and she felt her hands curl into fists. "I didn't impersonate anyone," she said, her voice shaking. Bridget's eyes narrowed. "You people are always playing victim," she muttered, just low enough that only Zariah and Tessa heard it. Tessa gasped quietly. Zariah's breath caught. And that was when it stopped being a mistake. The moment wasn't about seating anymore. It wasn't about safety. This was a message, a warning. You don't belong here, and if you refuse to move quietly, we'll make you wish you had. Zariah sat down in 2A and clicked her seatbelt into place. It was the only thing she could control in that moment. The sound echoed, so judging, and soft but defiant. Bridget stared at her for a second longer, eyes cold, jaw clenched. Then she turned and walked away. For now. But the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The cabin lights dimmed as the boarding door sealed shut with a solid thunk. The chime for final checks sounded overhead, and the plane began its slow pushback from the gate. Passengers adjusted seatbelts, powered off devices, and settled in for the 5-hour overnight flight from Seattle to Dulles. Zariah stared out the window, her body tense, her right foot tapping quietly against the carpeted floor. She had made it into her seat. She had followed every rule, but her stomach still twisted, knowing Bridget hadn't truly let the matter go. 2 rows behind her, Bridget stood near the galley, arms crossed tight, watching her. The plane was moving now, taxiing slowly toward the runway, but Bridget wasn't done. Not even close. She stepped forward, heels clacking softly over the cabin floor. Tessa noticed first, eyes widening as Bridget passed her without a word. Zariah felt the presence before she heard the voice. "Unbuckle. Now." She turned slowly, confused. "We're taxiing," Zariah said, her voice low but steady. "The seatbelt sign is on." Bridget leaned in closer, lowering her voice but keeping the authority. "You're not cleared for this seat. You're in violation of federal aviation regulations by disobeying crew instructions. If you don't unbuckle and move, I will have you removed as a security threat." Zariah blinked. "You're threatening me because I'm sitting in the seat I was assigned?" "This is not a negotiation," Bridget snapped. "We're not in the air yet."
"I can still have you escorted off. You had the manifest, you know I belong here. You don't belong anywhere. Anywhere. I can't trust you to follow orders." The words weren't shouted, but they rang loud enough for half the cabin to hear. A man across the aisle, anywhere, a tech consultant in his 30s, pulled off his headphones. A woman in 1D subtly began recording with her phone. Zariah looked around. She could feel their eyes again, feel the tension rippling across the rows. But she also felt something else now, a quiet defiance rising in her chest. Her hand went to her seatbelt buckle, not to undo it, but to grip it. "No," she said clearly. Bridget's nostrils flared. "You're going to get us delayed," she hissed. "Is that what you want? You want to make this about you?" "I want to go to DC and be left alone," Zariah said. "I'm 12. I'm not a threat." Bridget looked over her shoulder as if expecting backup. No one moved. She turned back to Zariah. Her voice dropped even lower. "Listen here, little girl. You can either walk off this plane on your own, or I can drag you back to economy and explain to everyone there why you're causing a national delay." Zariah's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers trembled. She didn't speak this time. She just closed her eyes, then looked down at her lap, willing herself not to cry. Then Bridget reached down. She didn't go for the seatbelt. She went for Zariah's arm, the one resting gently on the armrest. Her fingers clamped down like a vice, nails digging into the soft fabric of Zariah's hoodie. "What are you doing?" Zariah gasped, trying to pull away. Bridget held firm. "You think a seatbelt's going to protect you?" she whispered. "You think sitting here makes you something? You don't get to defy me and stay comfortable." She braced one foot against the base of the seat and yanked. The belt held Zariah's body in place. Her torso didn't move, but her arm did, pulled hard and fast at a bad angle. Her shoulder twisted halfway out of alignment. There was a sudden, sickening pop, followed by a sharp snap that made several passengers flinch. Zariah screamed.
Not a scream of fear, a scream of pain, pure, sharp, involuntary. It echoed down the aisle like a fire alarm. Her arm bent outward, limp at the elbow. She clutched it with her other hand, sobbing now, her body curling in on itself. Bridget stepped back like she had touched something hot. Her eyes darted around the cabin. "She attacked me," Bridget shouted, voice rising. "I tried to restrain her. She resisted." The businessman in 1C stood up, furious. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "Sit down, sir," Bridget barked. "Remain seated." "Remain seated?" the woman behind her repeated, shocked. "You just broke a child's arm." Zariah rocked back and forth, her face white with pain, her voice a cracked whisper. "My arm, my arm." And somewhere, in the shadows of business class, a man rose to his feet. Bridget didn't see him yet. No one did. But Zariah's dad had just heard his daughter scream, and he was about to walk through that curtain with the calm of a father and the fury of a CEO. The storm was just beginning. The scream did not fade right away. It hung in the air, vibrating against the leather seats and polished wood trim, cutting through the low rumble of the engines as the aircraft continued to taxi. For a few seconds, no one moved. People froze the way they do when their brains refuse to accept what their eyes have just seen. Zariah was folded inward now, her body instinctively trying to protect itself. Her right arm hung wrong, pressed against her chest by her left hand, as if holding it close could undo what had just happened. Her breathing came in sharp, broken bursts. Every inhale sent another wave of pain through her shoulder and down to her fingertips. Bridget stood a step back from the seat, her chest heaving. For a moment, fear flashed across her face. Real fear, the kind that comes when you realize you have crossed a line you cannot uncross. Then her training kicked in, or at least the version of training she believed would protect her. "She attacked me," Bridget said loudly, projecting her voice down the cabin aisle. "I was forced to restrain her. She refused multiple lawful instructions." Her words came fast now, rehearsed almost automatically. Control the narrative.
"That is not what happened," Graham Pritchard said, standing up fully this time. His face was flushed with anger. "You grabbed her. We all saw it." Bridget spun on him. "Sir, sit down immediately. You are interfering with a crew operation." "A crew operation does not involve breaking a child's arm," he shot back. Several passengers were on their phones now. No one was hiding it. A woman 2 rows back whispered, "Oh my God, over and over under her breath. Another man shook his head slowly, staring at Zariah with a mixture of horror and shame. Tessa rushed forward with the medical kit, her hands shaking as she dropped to her knees beside the seat. "Zariah," she said gently, "honey, can you look at me?" Zariah tried. Tears blurred her vision. Her lips trembled. "It hurts,"
she whispered. "It really hurts." "I know," Tessa said softly. "I know. Do not move your arm. Just breathe." Bridget watched this scene unfold with a tight jaw. The cabin had slipped out of her control. She could feel it. People were no longer deferring to her authority. They were looking at her like she was something dangerous. She reached for the interphone mounted on the bulkhead and pressed the call button. "Captain," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "We have a disruptive passenger in first class. A minor became aggressive during taxi. There is an injury." In business class, just beyond the curtain, Drayton Vale had already unbuckled. The moment the scream had changed from fear to pain, something inside him had snapped. Not explosively, quietly, cleanly, like steel under too much pressure. He stepped into the aisle as the curtain slid back, his movements deliberate, his expression unreadable. People parted without being asked. They felt it, the weight of him. When he saw Zariah, his breath stopped. Her face was streaked with tears. Her body was shaking. Her arm was bent in a way no father should ever see. For a fraction of a second, the world narrowed to just that image. His little girl, hurt, publicly, helpless. He dropped to one knee beside her. "Hey," he said quietly. His voice did not shake. "I am here." Zariah turned her head at the sound of his voice.
Her eyes widened in disbelief, then filled again. "Dad!" she sobbed. He did not look at Bridget. Not yet. He gently placed his hand on Zariah's shoulder, careful not to touch the injured arm. "Do not move," he said softly. "I have you. You are safe." Bridget scoffed from behind him. "Sir, you need to step away from the passenger. She assaulted a crew member." That was when Drayton stood, slowly, fully. He turned to face Bridget at last. He did not raise his voice. He did not shout. And that somehow worsened it. "You put your hands on my daughter," he said. Each word landed heavy. "You pulled her while she was restrained. You broke her arm." Bridget opened her mouth. She refused to comply. "I followed procedure." "You followed nothing," Drayton replied. "You followed your prejudice." A hush fell over the cabin. He turned to Tessa. "Ice," he said. "Splint. Now." "Yes, sir," Tessa replied instantly, grateful for clear direction. Drayton then looked toward the cockpit. "Captain, this is Drayton Vale. We are returning to the gate immediately. There has been an assault on a minor." There was a pause. Then the captain's voice crackled back through the intercom, tense and alert. "Understood. Returning to the gate." Bridget's confidence cracked. "You cannot make that call," she snapped. "I am the chief purser." Drayton stepped closer to her. She stepped close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You do not outrank a medical emergency," he said calmly, "and you do not outrank a father whose child you just injured." She swallowed hard. Around them, the cabin had chosen its side. Phones kept recording, witnesses kept watching, and the lie Bridget tried to build was already collapsing under the weight of too many eyes. The plane began its slow turn back toward the terminal. For the first time since opening her mouth to humiliate a child, Bridget Sloan realized that she might not walk away from this. Not with her job, not with her freedom, and not with the story she thought she controlled. The return taxi to the gate felt like the longest 5 minutes of Bridget Sloan's life. She stood stiffly in the forward galley, arms folded tight, eyes darting from the cabin door to the passengers still recording.
Her perfectly composed mask was cracking. Behind her, the low hum of private conversations buzzed, passengers whispering, sharing footage, murmuring words like lawsuit, assault, and insane. Zari sat silently in 2A, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Her arm was immobilized by a makeshift splint fashioned from a safety card and an airline blanket, gently wrapped and stabilized by Tessa, who knelt beside her. The younger flight attendant was working with careful hands and clenched teeth, every motion a quiet rebellion against what her superior had done. Drayton Vale stood across the aisle, his back to the window, his eyes locked on the cabin door,
like a man waiting for permission to act. Except he didn't need permission. He was calculating, observing, and burning. He hadn't spoken again since ordering the captain to return to the gate. He didn't need to. Everything in his presence said control, not anger, not chaos, but the kind of contained power that makes people instinctively step aside. Every time Bridget looked his way, she found herself looking away just as quickly. But she couldn't help herself. She had to try one more time. She was resisting, Bridget muttered under her breath, speaking directly to Drayton for the first time since the injury. She got physical first. I had to restrain her. I was protecting the cabin. Drayton didn't move. He just looked at her, slowly, deliberately. "Do you hear yourself?" he asked, his voice smooth and cool. "You are defending the act of breaking a 12-year-old girl's arm because she sat in the seat that was printed on her ticket, because you didn't like how she looked." Bridget opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Drayton leaned in half an inch, not enough to threaten, just enough to cut the distance between calm and consequence. "You want to keep telling that story?" he said, his voice low and precise. "In front of all these cameras? In front of these people? In front of the lawyers who will be lining up to take this case pro bono?" Her eyes flinched at the mention of cameras. She turned and saw half the cabin still holding up phones. One man in 3A was live streaming on Instagram.
Another was already emailing a clip to someone, probably a journalist. Bridget backed away a step, but Drayton wasn't finished. He turned to the rest of the cabin, raising his voice just slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I'm sorry you've had to witness what just happened. I'm sorry my daughter had to become the target of someone else's bias. And I'm sorry the people who were supposed to protect her made her feel like she didn't belong." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. They weren't loud, but they had weight. "I assure you," he continued, "this isn't over. Not for her, not for this airline, and certainly not for the woman who thought she could get away with hurting a child and calling it policy." Somewhere near the back of first class, a passenger whispered, "That's Drayton Vale, from Aethergrid." A ripple moved through the cabin. The name meant something. Aethergrid wasn't just a tech company. It was the tech company, the brains behind half the aviation safety software in the country. Real-time diagnostics, predictive failure alerts, secure scheduling systems. If he pulled their license, Northridge Airways wouldn't just lose one flight, they'd lose their fleet. Bridget swallowed hard. Her hands, once so sure, were now twitching at her sides. "I didn't know," she said, her voice barely audible. "No," Drayton said, "you didn't. And that's the problem." The aircraft came to a slow, quiet stop at the gate. The seatbelt sign pinged off. But no one stood. No one reached for luggage. They all waited. The cabin door opened with a hiss, and 3 uniformed officers stepped aboard, followed by 2 airport medics pushing a gurney. "Seat 2A?" the lead officer asked. Drayton nodded. He stepped back as the medics moved to Zarya, speaking gently, checking vitals, preparing to lift her safely. Zarya winced, but stayed silent. "You're brave," one medic said kindly. "Like her father," Tessa added softly. Bridget took a step forward. "This was a misunderstanding," she said, her voice brittle. "I didn't mean—" The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, we'll need you to step off the aircraft." "For what?" she said it, stunned. "For questioning," the officer said. "Possible assault on a minor. Additionally, there are charges of endangering the safety of an aircraft." Passengers didn't cheer, but they didn't look surprised either.
As Bridget was escorted off, her spine straight and face blank, Drayton returned to his daughter's side. Zarya looked up at him, her eyes glassy but alert. "You're here," she whispered. "Always," he said. And with that, he walked beside her as they rolled her out, not as the CEO of Aethergrid, but as her dad, and the man out to change everything. The jet bridge connected with a low, echoing clunk, and the cabin door swung open like the start of a courtroom drama. Airport police stepped in first, 2 officers in Navy uniforms with calm, unreadable expressions, followed by a pair of paramedics rolling a collapsible stretcher. The entire front half of the aircraft was silent, watching, phones still raised. every passenger fully aware they were now witnesses in something far bigger than a flight delay. Drayton stood beside Zoraya's seat, calm but alert, his body a quiet wall between his daughter and anyone who might come too close. He kept his voice steady as he spoke to the medics. "She has a suspected spiral fracture in her upper right arm," he said. "There's swelling and limited sensation in her fingers. Her pain is around 8 or 9. The medics nodded, impressed. One of them gave him a curious glance, probably wondering if he was a doctor. Drayton didn't offer a title. He just focused on Zoraya. "We're going to give her something for the pain," the lead medic said gently, preparing the injection. "Then we'll move her on to the stretcher." Zoraya nodded, her voice too thin to speak. Her eyes never left her dad's face. As they worked, one of the officers turned toward Bridget, who had stepped aside but hadn't left the cabin. Her arms were folded, but her confidence had returned, or at least the version of it that came with denial. "Officer," she began, motioning toward Drayton, "I need to report an incident of passenger interference. That man stormed the cabin, threatened me, and disrupted a federal crew operation. I was restraining a child who had become combative. She hit me." The officer raised a brow, looking down at her neatly pressed uniform and unblemished face. "She hit you?" he repeated. "Yes," Bridget said quickly, "and he threatened me, verbally. I want to press charges for interference with a flight crew and intimidation."
From his seat, Mr. Pritchard, the businessman in 1C, scoffed audibly. "That's not what happened," he said. "You assaulted that girl. She was calm, polite. You escalated." Bridget's eyes narrowed. "Sir, I understand this is distressing, but passengers often misinterpret protocol." "No," interrupted a voice behind her. It was Tessa. She stepped forward, still holding her tablet, her face pale but resolute. "I'm a crew member," she said, "and I saw everything." The manifest clearly listed Zoraya Vale as a first-class VIP. The manifest included a note stating that Zoraya Vale should not be moved. Bridget ignored it. She tried to force her to relocate, and when Zoraya refused to unbuckle during taxi, which would have been against FAA rules, Bridget grabbed her arm and yanked it, hard. I heard the snap. Bridget's mouth opened, but no words came out. The second officer turned to Tessa. "Do you have that manifest?" Tessa handed him the tablet. "It's still on screen, and she's listed as a high-security passenger. There's even an internal tag linked to AetherGrid. I tried to stop her. I swear I did." The officer took one look at the display and nodded. At that moment, Juno Park, the young woman in 3D who'd been filming quietly since the beginning, stood up and raised her hand like they were in a classroom. "I also have video," she said. You can clearly hear Bridget saying, "You don't belong up here," and then grabbing the kid. She turned the phone around, pressing play. The audio filled the front cabin. The words were unmistakable. Bridget went pale. The officer turned back to her. "Ma'am, please place your hands behind your back." "What?" she whispered, eyes wide. No, you can't. You are being detained for questioning regarding assault on a minor and potential endangerment of a flight. You have the right to remain silent." Bridget's hands trembled as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "She's not who you think she is." The officer looked at her coolly. "No, I think you're the one who didn't know who she was." As they escorted Bridget off the plane, Drayton quietly watched, his face unreadable. He didn't gloat. He didn't nod in satisfaction.
He just turned back to Zoraya, who was now resting on the stretcher, eyes fluttering from the pain medication. "Daddy," she whispered, barely audible. "They believed me." Drayton brushed a hand against her curls, careful not to jostle her. "They saw the truth," he said softly, "and that's all you ever need." He walked beside her as the medics pushed the stretcher down the jet bridge. Behind them, the plane remained grounded, both literally and symbolically, and for Northridge Airways, the turbulence was only just beginning. 3 hours later, the sterile white lights of Seattle's Providence Children's Hospital buzzed softly above Drayton as he sat in a chair too small for his broad shoulders.
Zariah was finally resting after a flurry of x-rays, pain management, and a cast that would cover most of her arm for at least the next 8 weeks. Her fracture was clean, but serious, a full spiral break of the humerus with the risk of nerve compression. The doctor said she was lucky it didn't tear through the skin. Lucky. Drayton had replayed the moment in his head 100 times, the sound, the look on her face. If he had been sitting 1 row closer, things might have been different. That he didn't stop it before it happened. He rubbed a hand down his face and let out a breath just as someone cleared their throat softly behind him. "Mr. Vale?" He turned. Standing at the doorway was a woman in a navy pantsuit, so crisp it could have cut glass. She was accompanied by a younger man carrying a leather portfolio and a steel briefcase. "Marisol Keene," she said, extending a hand that Drayton didn't take. "Vice President of Operations, Northridge Airways." He stared at her for a moment, then looked past her at the briefcase. "You brought a check." She gave a tight, practiced smile. "We brought options." Drayton didn't move from his chair. Marisol stepped inside, folding her hands in front of her like a headmistress addressing a stubborn student. "First," she said, "let me say on behalf of the airline, we are deeply sorry for the distress your family has experienced. What happened to your daughter was unacceptable. The employee in question has been removed from duty pending internal review." "Removed from duty," Drayton repeated flatly. "Not fired."
"It's a legal process," she replied smoothly. "Due diligence. But I want you to know this is not who we are. Northridge Airways is committed to safety and customer dignity." Drayton looked back at the door to Zariah's room. "Then why are you here and not your CEO?" he asked. Marisol's jaw tightened just slightly. "This matter involves regional operations. I've been empowered to—" "No," Drayton interrupted. "You've been sent to put a lid on it before it explodes." She took that hit with grace, then nodded to the man with the briefcase. He opened it. Inside was a check. Large, official, printed cleanly on watermarked paper. 6 figures. 100,000, Marisol said. "Immediate relief for medical expenses, therapy, and hardship. We're also prepared to offer private travel vouchers, complimentary upgrades, and a charitable donation to a children's aviation education fund in your daughter's name." Drayton raised an eyebrow. "And the NDA?" The younger man pulled a second folder from the case and placed it on the table. "Standard," Marisol said. "Confidentiality. No interviews, no social media posts, no public statements. We'd handle the incident internally, and your daughter would be protected from media exposure." He picked up the folder, flipped through the pages, and closed it. "You think this is about money?" he said, his voice soft but sharp. "No," she said quickly. "We think it's about healing. Dignity. Your daughter has already been through so much." Drayton stood now, slowly, letting the full height of his frame unfold. "She didn't lose her arm," he said. "She lost her place in someone else's version of the world, and now you want her to pretend it didn't happen, so your version of the world can stay clean." "Mr. Vale," Marisol said, adjusting her tone, "I know you run Aethergrid. I know you understand scale. PR, fallout, stock hits. They spiral. It doesn't help your daughter if her story becomes national news." "She's already national news," Drayton said. "You just haven't refreshed your feed in the last 10 minutes. Marisol hesitated, clearly thrown. "I'll tell you what," Drayton continued. "Keep your check. You're going to need it for the lawyers."
And if you're really sorry, go back to corporate and ask them why a purser with a history of passenger complaints, especially involving race, was still in charge of a first-class cabin. That cracked her calm. "There's no history of complaints," she said, responding too quickly. He tilted his head. "I didn't say anything about race," he said. She blinked. He didn't smile. "Good night, Miss Keene." She nodded stiffly. The lawyer closed the briefcase. They left without another word. As the door shut behind them, Drayton looked back at Zariah's room. He didn't have a check in his hand. He had something far more dangerous. The truth. And he had just decided he was done letting people buy their way out of it.
The next morning, Drayton didn't go home. He didn't call his PR team. He didn't draft a statement or make a single social media post. Instead, he drove across the city to a low-profile brick building with no signage out front, just a keycard panel, a fingerprint scanner, and a retinal lens that blinked when he stepped forward. This was the Seattle node of AetherGrid's Aviation Integrity Division. Inside, 3 stories of silent servers and secured offices handled the live diagnostics for over 300 commercial aircraft flying in North America at any given time. He entered his credentials and walked straight through the security doors. "Mr. Vale," said a tall engineer in a North Face fleece, "we didn't expect. Pull the system logs for all Northridge 787 and 777 aircraft over the past 90 days, Drayton said. Show me anomaly suppressions, overrides, and safety flag dismissals, anything overwritten manually by ground ops." The man blinked, nodded, and turned. 30 minutes later, Drayton stood in front of a massive display screen showing rows of digital flight IDs and codes, green for safe, yellow for caution, and red for failure. Then he saw it, a blinking cluster of yellow logs, too many, from 2 Northridge planes that should have triggered mandatory checks, but they hadn't, because someone had overridden the warnings. The safety algorithms that AetherGrid had built, designed to detect structural fatigue, deferred maintenance, landing gear stress, and electrical inconsistencies, had worked. They had raised the flags, but someone inside Northridge had buried them. On 14 separate occasions, engineering staff had manually dismissed alerts that should have grounded specific aircraft for inspection. Drayton didn't swear. He didn't pace.
He just stared. Now the situation was bigger than Zariah, bigger than Bridget. Now it was a system and a company putting lives at risk to save turnaround time. He turned to the engineer. "Print me everything, logs, access records, timestamps, and get me legal. We're about to escalate." Within an hour, his internal counsel was on a secure call. "This goes beyond negligence," said the lawyer, his voice tense. "If Northridge suppressed flight safety alerts knowingly, that's fraud, a regulatory violation, and potentially a criminal conspiracy. We're legally obligated to notify the FAA if a client compromises AetherGrid's operational integrity." Drayton already knew that. He wasn't calling to ask permission, he was calling to activate the clause. Every AetherGrid contract, especially the Tier 1 safety clients, contained an emergency clause. If a client was found to be intentionally bypassing safety protocol, AetherGrid could unilaterally suspend their platform access, pending investigation. Drayton had written that clause himself. After all, he built the system. He knew what corners airlines would try to cut. Now he was watching one of them do it, and it just happened to be the same airline whose flight attendant snapped his daughter's arm because she didn't believe she belonged up front. He tapped the command line and entered a code string. "Initiate emergency safety hold. Client Northridge Airways. Reason override pattern anomalies. Pending FAA notification. Authorization DVAL Executive Override Protocol 001A." He hit enter. Across the country, a quiet ripple began. Within 60 seconds, internal emails started flying inside Northridge headquarters. Their dispatch systems blinked red. Pilots were locked out of diagnostic dashboards. Maintenance teams couldn't access the predictive alert platform. And at 10:04 a.m. Pacific time, every aircraft in the Northridge fleet carrying an active AetherGrid license was flagged for immediate audit. Drayton stood back from the terminal and took a breath. He didn't smile. He didn't feel satisfaction. He felt focused. He felt focused because he knew what would come next. Northridge would try to bury him in legal threats. They'd accuse him of revenge. They would accuse him of waging a personal war by exploiting his daughter's injury. But the truth was simple. Zariah's broken arm had exposed a fracture running through the entire airline. This was a fracture that they had been concealing with digital duct tape and deniable memos.
And Drayton had just become the one man willing to snap the industry back into place. Not with rage, but with proof, hard data, and the authority to flip the switch. This wasn't solely for the sake of justice. This authority extends not only to justice, but also to ensure safety. Because this wasn't just about Zariah anymore. It was about every passenger who stepped onto a plane thinking the systems were built to protect them. And Drayton wasn't going to let anyone or any airline fake that protection again. The damage had already occurred by the time the news spread nationwide. CNN picked it up first. Tech CEO grounds airline over daughter's injury, followed by a flood of headlines, social media takes, and 20-minute YouTube breakdowns complete with screenshots, flight data overlays, and reaction clips. Footage of Zariah clutching her broken arm in seat 2A had gone viral,
and Drayton's name trended alongside it. However, Northridge was determined not to surrender without a fight. Inside their downtown Chicago headquarters, the executive suite was in full crisis mode. Legal teams huddled in class-walled rooms, PR specialists ran scenarios like it was election night. And in a corner office with blackout blinds and its espresso bar, Marisol Keene was making phone calls, fast, cold, and precise. By noon, Northridge's counterattack had begun. First came the leak. An anonymous source released an internal memo alleging that Drayton Vale had a history of volatile behavior and reputation-based retaliation. The leak suggested he was using his daughter's injury as leverage in a contract negotiation, that this wasn't about justice, it was about power. Then came the whispers. Dozens of social media accounts, some real, some clearly bot-driven, began posting comments on every news story. Is this guy really trying to bankrupt an airline over one broken arm? Sounds like a rich dad with a vendetta. Don't let this event become another fake outrage moment. We don't know what really happened. The posts were subtle, not overtly aggressive, but just enough to create confusion. Drayton saw them, he expected them, but he didn't expect what came next. A former Northridge executive, supposedly unaffiliated, penned an op-ed in a national business magazine questioning whether Zariah had received coaching. The article painted a picture of a precocious child with a history of asserting privilege in adult spaces. Her father's influence may have amplified her trauma response.
They didn't accuse her of lying. They just planted the seed. Then they stepped back and let the comments section grow. Drayton sat at his desk in Aether Grid's Seattle office, reading it twice, his jaw clenched. The article didn't name Zariah directly, but it used her image. A still frame from the flight, her face frozen mid-tear, one arm in a sling, her eyes open and scared. He turned off his monitor. He sat in silence for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and called his attorney. "I need you to prepare for defamation," he said. "Multiple fronts." "Already on it," the attorney replied. "They're not even being subtle anymore. I want every proxy account traced. Every one of their legal contractors was reviewed. I want to know if the magazine that ran this op-ed ever got ad dollars from Northridge." The attorney asserted, "You're heading into war." "No," Drayton answered. "They are. I'm just not blinking." Outside the building, reporters were starting to gather. A few stood near the main doors. Another pair sat in unmarked cars, cameras ready, waiting for a glimpse of Drayton leaving the building. Inside, his team worked like a storm was coming, because it was. But none of it shook Drayton more than what Zariah said that night. They were back home, finally. She was resting on the couch, one arm in a cast, the other holding a popsicle. She looked up at him and asked, "Did I make it worse? Because I didn't move." Drayton knelt beside her, his heart tight in his chest. "No," he said firmly. "You made it clear that you belong, that no one gets to move you just because they think you're not enough." She nodded, but her eyes still held that question, that quiet fear that somehow she had started all of this. That night, after she fell asleep, Drayton sat at the dining table with a legal pad and a pen. He began writing down names, people who needed to be held accountable, outlets that had spread lies, PR firms hired to smear children. He wasn't just protecting his daughter anymore. He was protecting the truth. This was due to the airline's decision. They didn't try to apologize. They didn't try to make things right. They tried to rewrite the story.
And Drayton Vale was about to make damn sure they never got away with it. Drayton knew how the game was played. He had watched enough billion-dollar companies spin disaster into denial. He'd seen executives throw middle managers under the bus, shift blame sideways, and bury stories under PR noise and flashy donations. That wasn't new. What mattered now was how Northridge played, and what he could do to make sure the rules applied to them this time. So he went to the one place where spin didn't matter, the Federal Aviation Administration. The Federal Aviation Administration, it wasn't a dramatic press conference or a viral tweet. It was a quiet appointment made through official channels, scheduled behind closed doors at the FAA's Pacific Northwest Regional Office, a beige government building tucked behind a chain-link fence and a loading dock. He didn't bring a camera crew. He brought only a black folio containing a USB drive, a printed report, and a letter signed under oath. Inside, he sat across from two investigators in gray suits. One was a woman in her early 50s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense.
The other was younger and quieter, taking notes while the older one did most of the talking. "We've reviewed your submission," she said. "Your team flagged multiple override instances on active airframes in the Northridge fleet. Are these logs pulled directly from your internal audit software?" Drayton nodded. "Our diagnostic platform logs both the original alert and any instances of manual suppression. Our systems did not initiate these suppression events. They came from client-side terminals, logged under Northridge ground maintenance staff." The investigator flipped to a highlighted section of the report. "This override pattern, are you suggesting they intentionally bypassed federally mandated inspections?" "I'm not suggesting," Drayton said calmly. "I'm confirming. These aren't bugs, they're choices. Systematic choices to avoid aircraft downtime." The room was silent for a beat. Finally, the younger investigator asked, "And your company didn't report this earlier because—" "We have contracts," Drayton replied, "and we honor them, but every Aether Grid contract includes an ethics override clause. If we believe a client's actions endanger public safety, we're not just allowed to report it, we're required to." "You are invoking that clause now," the senior agent clarified. "I already did," Drayton said. "Last night, we've suspended system support across all Northridge aircraft pending FAA clearance." The agent raised her brows.
That's going to create a storm. Drayton nodded. It should. There was a moment of pause before the investigator stood and extended her hand. "We'll be opening a formal investigation within 48 hours, she said. "You've done your part. From here, it's ours." Drayton shook her hand. No smile, just mutual understanding. As he left the building, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Aether Grid Legal. "Northridge Council has issued a preliminary cease and desist. They're threatening breach of contract litigation. Do you want to respond?" Drayton texted back in 3 words, "Let them try." That same afternoon, an internal FAA memo was drafted. Subject: Request for immediate compliance review of Northridge Airways fleet operations. It included 3 tail numbers flagged by Drayton's team, all of which had been flying transcontinental routes, and all of which had bypassed landing gear stress tests more than once. By the following morning, FAA inspectors were on site at 2 major airports. Planes were pulled from gates, passengers were rerouted. Techs in orange vests began opening panels and scanning for microfractures no one was supposed to be looking for. The press didn't know yet, but inside the industry people felt it. Something was moving. Back at Aether Grid, Drayton gathered his leadership team. "This isn't a PR stunt," he told them. "We're not taking questions, we're not chasing headlines. We're doing our job the right way, through the system. If the FAA finds what we found, Northridge won't be able to hide behind the narrative." His CTO looked up. "You're betting on transparency and an industry built on NDAs." "I'm betting on data," Drayton said, "and the fact that eventually, truth beats spin." Later that evening, a journalist from the Wall Street Journal called requesting an off-the-record comment. Drayton declined. He wasn't interested in the press. Not yet. He had chosen the path of caution and diligence, the legal road, the challenging road. Because once this was official, once the FAA published their findings, it wouldn't be his word against a company anymore. It would be regulation. It would be recorded. And most importantly, it would be public. It started with a single alert. At 6:32 a.m. Eastern, every Northridge Airways dispatch center received the same system message, delivered via secure FAA channel, and backed by a red banner of urgency.
Immediate action required. FAA temporary grounding order, selected fleet. Effective immediately. All 777 and 787 aircraft in service under Northridge Airways shall cease operation pending emergency inspection. Within 60 seconds, the airline's internal communications exploded. By 6:35 a.m., flight operations managers were calling gate agents, telling them to delay boarding on more than 30 flights across major U.S. hubs. Maintenance crews scrambled toward aircraft already preparing for pushback. Flight attendants were told to stay on board but keep passengers seated. Pilots received ACARS messages mid-checklist. Do not proceed. Await further instruction. At Chicago O'Hare, 3 aircraft were halted on the taxiway. In Atlanta, passengers were ordered back to the gate after boarding. At JFK, a 777 bound for Frankfurt had just left the gate when the pilot was told to return. Passengers grumbled. Gate agents scrambled for explanations. But by 7 a.m., the media had caught wind. First a tweet, then a local news station, then chaos. Breaking: FAA grounds Northridge Airways wide-body fleet. At 7:20 a.m., cable news filled the air with graphics depicting planes stuck on runways, while experts speculated about potential mechanical malfunctions or threats to national security. The airline issued a carefully worded press release. Northridge Airways is cooperating fully with FAA compliance protocols. Passenger safety remains our top priority.
But it was already too late. Screens at airports from LAX to Boston began turning red. Cancelled, delayed, on hold. Passengers filled terminals, demanding answers. Some shouted, others recorded. Footage of long lines and frustrated flyers flooded TikTok and Instagram with captions like, "Northridge grounded? What's going on?" In the control tower at Dulles International, a supervisor looked at the live traffic map and muttered, "We've never grounded this many wide-bodies in a single day." AetherGrid servers were operating at high temperatures, processing real-time inspection data received from field crews. Already, structural abnormalities that had gone undetected or ignored in previous internal checks had flagged 3 aircraft. None of them had failed mid-flight, yet. Back at FAA headquarters in DC, the agency's public affairs team was preparing for the briefing they never wanted to give. They knew what the data said. They had seen the override logs. They had confirmed Drayton's findings. At 9 a.m.,
The FAA's Deputy Director of Flight Safety, Marcia Reynolds, stepped up to a podium in front of a sea of microphones. "This morning," she said clearly, "we issued a temporary grounding of Northridge Airways' long-haul aircraft fleet due to credible evidence of safety protocol breaches." She did not make this decision lightly, but when there is reason to believe aircraft are flying without adequate maintenance verification, the cost of waiting is too high. She didn't name Drayton Vale. She didn't have to. By then, the internet had already crowned him, the man who grounded an airline. But inside Northridge, the mood wasn't just panic, it was fury. In a private boardroom in Chicago, executives screamed over one another. Lawsuits were drafted, contracts were dissected. Someone demanded to know why the CTO hadn't caught this. Another legal blame. Another cursed the little girl incident that had started all this. And in the center of it all, the CEO, Richard Holcomb, stood silently, staring at the FAA bulletin on his phone. "Do we sue him?" someone asked. Richard shook his head. "He didn't leak anything," he said. "He triggered a clause we signed, and now he's protected." Marisol Keene, pale, tight-lipped, leaned forward. "So what now?" "We survive," Richard said, "and pray no one finds out how long this was going on." But someone already had, and he had receipts. Across the country, in his office at AetherGrid, Drayton watched the press conference on a muted screen. He didn't smile. He didn't raise a fist. He just nodded once. Then he turned back to his team. "Start prepping the full audit package," he said. "We're giving it all to the NTSB. Everything. No redactions." His assistant looked up. Even the emails. Especially the emails. And just like that, what had started as a single broken arm had become the spark that shook an entire airline. Not with outrage, but with facts, with proof, and with one man who refused to sit quietly while someone else decided where his daughter, or anyone, was allowed to belong. The hearing was standing room only. The Federal Senate Subcommittee on Aviation Safety had convened an emergency public session inside the Dirksen Senate Office Building in Washington, D.C.
A polished seal of the United States hung behind the long mahogany desk, where senators in tailored suits sat beneath the hum of C-SPAN cameras and the low murmur of the press. This wasn't just politics. This was a spectacle, and every seat in the room knew it. At one table sat the corporate defense, Northridge Airways CEO Richard Holcomb, flanked by Marisol Keene and 2 white-shoed attorneys from a powerhouse DC law firm. Their expressions were tight, controlled, practiced. Across from them sat Drayton Vale. No entourage, no blazer. He wore just a black button-down shirt and had calm eyes. Next to him, Zariah sat quietly in a tailored school uniform, her cast still visible beneath her jacket. She didn't fidget, she didn't speak, but every camera in the room was already focused on her. At the far end sat the surprise witness, Tessa Nguyen, summoned under whistleblower protections. She looked nervous but determined. The chairwoman of the committee, Senator Evelyn Harper from Michigan, gavelled the session into order. "We are here today," she said, "because a child's arm was broken on an airplane, and in the weeks that followed, we discovered a company willing to bend more than just limbs to avoid accountability." She looked directly at Richard Holcomb. "Let's begin with Northridge Airways." Holcomb adjusted his microphone. "Madam Chair," he began, voice smooth, "what happened to Miss Vale was deeply regrettable. It was the act of one employee,
now terminated. But let me be clear, this incident does not reflect the values of our airline. Senator Harper raised an eyebrow. Is that so? She nodded to an aide at the tech station. The monitors in the room lit up. Video footage played. The clip from Juno Park's phone. Bridget Sloan's voice rang out, clear and sharp. You don't belong up here. Then the grab, the wrench, the scream. Zariah flinched slightly. Drayton reached under the table and held her hand. The video ended. Murmurs rippled across the room. That, Senator Harper said slowly, did not sound like airline policy. Holcomb shifted in his chair. The video, while alarming, lacks full context. Our crew believed there was a security risk, and we'll get to your internal memos, Harper cut in. Miss Nguyen, would you please tell us what you saw that day? Tessa took a breath, then spoke into the microphone.
I saw a child in her assigned seat, calm, respectful. I saw a supervisor override the system warning that she was not to be moved. I heard racial undertones. I heard you people. I saw a deliberate act of aggression disguised as a procedure. And I saw a child's arm get broken because someone couldn't admit they were mistaken. Silence fell across the chamber. Then came the second blow. Harper tapped the folder in front of her. We have here, submitted by Aethergrid, internal emails from Northridge's maintenance logs. One reads, quote, if Vale won't back down, we'll bury him in PR. His kid is a sympathy prop. Another reads, override logs need scrubbing before the FAA gets a look. Holcomb opened his mouth, but his attorney placed a hand on his arm. Harper turned back to Drayton. Mr. Vale, you chose not to file a private lawsuit. Why? Drayton looked up, steady. Because this was never just about my daughter. It was about what happens when arrogance becomes policy, when systems are manipulated, when people in charge think no one is watching. He turned to Zariah. She didn't belong in the back, and she didn't belong on the floor of that plane in pain. She belonged in the seat her ticket said, like any other human being. Senator Harper nodded. She looked to the gallery of reporters and aviation officials. This committee will be recommending not just civil penalties, but a full criminal investigation into Northridge Airways operations. We will not tolerate negligence disguised as efficiency, and we will not allow silence to be bought with hush money and NDAs. The gavel dropped. And just like that, Northridge's damage control crumbled under oath. The airline could spin headlines, bury logs, and smear reputations, but they couldn't stop the truth from playing on loop. Especially not when a 12-year-old girl with a cast on her arm and dignity in her eyes showed the world exactly where she belonged, and who should never have doubted it. 6 months later, the skies were quiet, but Zariah Vale's voice was not. Her arm had healed, though it bore a thin silver scar just above the elbow, a reminder of the day she refused to be moved. Physical therapy was slow and frustrating at times, but she never missed a session.
Not because she dreamed of playing violin again, but because she refused to let the pain define her limits. And she had found something new. In the time between courtrooms and recovery, Zariah had started drawing. Sketchbooks filled with planes, engines, cabins, and wings. She didn't just sketch what they looked like. She drew how they worked, how airflow moved, how support beams bent under strain. She didn't talk much about what happened on that flight anymore, but every page she filled was part of the story, her story, and it was just beginning. In a small hangar just outside Seattle, Aethergrid launched a program in her name, the Zariah Vale Fellowship, designed to give young girls of color full scholarships to pursue aviation, engineering, and aerospace careers. The application page had one line printed in bold: "You belong in any seat you earn." Zariah attended the ribbon cutting quietly, wearing a white dress shirt and a soft smile. She didn't make a speech. She didn't have to. The world had already clearly heard her voice. As for Northridge, the fallout was permanent. The company paid out millions in class action lawsuits, lost several contracts, and went under federal oversight for safety compliance. Marisol Keene resigned, Richard Holcomb stepped down before the end of the fiscal year, and Bridget Sloan, convicted of assault and misconduct, would never set foot in another cabin again. But the tale wasn't a revenge story. This was a reminder.
that silence can be broken by a single voice, that truth still matters when systems fail, that power, real power, doesn't come from a title or uniform. It comes from standing your ground, even when you're 12, even when you're scared, even when the world tells you to move. Dignity is not a privilege, it's a birthright. And occasionally, all it takes to change a system is one person refusing to leave their seat. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why we speak up, why we stand beside those who can't, consider sharing it, not for the clicks, but for the lesson. Because someone, somewhere, is still being told they don't belong. And maybe, just maybe, hearing this will help them stay seated until justice stands up beside them.